So we are very pleased to welcome you today to this community information session about a participatory grant-making pilot. My name is Mariam Assefa, and I'm consulting director at the Tamarack Institute. I'll be facilitating this session today. We are very proud to partner in this initiative with the World Education Services Mariam Assefa Fund to launch this pilot in one Ontario community in 2021. And we'll be focusing on the needs of immigrants and refugees in this community and funding community-selected projects and organizations that help remove economic barriers for immigrants and refugees and build more equitable economies. I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. And as settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land. I'm myself calling in today from the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation unceded territory, and Tiohtià:ke, or colonially known as Montreal, has traditionally been a gathering place for many First Nations. And I'm personally grateful for that spirit of dialogue and gathering that inhabits the place, and also for the great beauty of the St. Lawrence River that surrounds us. So I invite you to take a moment to reflect on your gratitude, and also to recognize the contribution and historic importance of Indigenous peoples. We believe that this must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise of truth and reconciliation real in all our communities. I myself have been the director of an immigration and settlement agency for several years in Montreal, and also supported the coordination of a pan-Canadian research network on immigration. And most recently, before joining Tamrac, I went on the funder side. So I joined United Way of Greater Montreal, and I had the opportunity to experiment some form of participatory grant making with the Collective Impact Project, which was a major philanthropic collaboration with the neighborhoods of Montreal. And I can say from that experience that I really saw how trust-based mechanisms help define really relevant local priorities, and that people that are most affected by the issues are the best place to talk about the barriers and how we should overcome them. So I'm very confident and excited about this participatory grant-making pilot. I see it as a great opportunity to develop this approach even further for the great benefits of communities. I'd like you to meet my colleagues, Liz Weaver, who's the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute, and Justin Williams, who's community animator, government and stewardship. So I'd like to pass it on to you to introduce yourself, tell us a few words about yourself, and also why this participatory grant-making pilot is important to you and to Tamarack. Liz, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mariam. And hi, everybody. Really excited to be joining you today. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas in the community known as Hamilton. I'm excited about this participatory grant-making pilot because it will really help Tamarack understand what it takes to work with the community in this way, and particularly with community partners. In our most recent work, Communities Building Youth Futures, we have a special fund called an innovation fund, which is co-designed with communities, and also community partners have the ability to apply for that innovation fund money and think about the types of innovation projects they want to get involved in their communities. And so we've dipped our toes into this, but I think this participatory grant-making pilot will be even more learning for Tamarack in terms of co-designing it with community and with community partners, and really understanding how collectively we can build more inclusive economies. And so really excited to be part of this project and to learn from community partners.
Would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself, Justin?
I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people along the Haldeman Tract in Kitchener. And as Mariam said, previously I worked with Tamrac in government and stewardship. And I'm really excited about this project because of the capacity to sort of shift power both at the community level towards groups and individuals who are often left out of decision-making in positions of power, but also at the broader scale within shifting how philanthropy works in the same way. So that's why I'm excited about the project.
So a slight overview of what we're going to do together today. First, we'll very briefly introduce Tamarack and the West Mariam Assefa Fund, and then talk about the participatory grant-making pilot itself. Our third point is about community selection guidelines, and we really hope to have an open discussion with you, turning on the cameras and getting your advice, your thoughts and ideas on what the criteria should be for selecting the community. So any advice that would be useful for us in this pilot. Then we'll talk about the next steps and how your community can express its interest in taking part in this process. And we'll have some closing remarks. If you have clarifying questions along the way, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and we'll make sure to answer them at the end of every section. So about Tamrac. So Tamrac, for those of us who don't know, those of you who don't know us, sorry, is a learning community and a growing network of 38,000 changemakers across Canada, the US, and globally that are committed to creating a collective impact to end poverty. For 20 years, our Learning Center has been supporting community leaders, organizations, citizens, funders, municipalities to develop both their skills and knowledge in 5 interconnected areas of practice that we believe really lead to impactful community change. And these 5 areas, as you can see, are collective impact, community engagement, collaborative leadership, community innovation, and evaluating impact. What we bring especially to this participatory grant-making pilot is our experience and knowledge of community engagement, most specifically engaging people with lived and living experience in both the design and decision-making processes. Tamarack is also supporting a network of vibrant communities. We support over 400 cities and local 400 cities and local leaders to implement large-scale change initiatives. Liz already touched upon our youth building future initiative, but we also work with networks to reduce poverty, deepen community, and our most recent vibrant community is to support a just and equitable climate transition. So the fund's North Star is an economy and a society where immigrants and refugees thrive and can achieve their aspirations. And the fund does that through 4 areas of work. Catalyzing solutions that advance equitable economic mobility for immigrants and refugees, accelerate the uptake of worker-centered innovations and practices. This participatory grant-making pilot is part of the innovation branch that the fund aims to develop. Also deepen the bench of leaders from immigrant communities and communities of color, and grow the movement to foster welcoming, inclusive, and equitable workplace communities and society. We are actually very glad to partner with the fund because of the thoughtfulness and the learning approach that they put into this pilot. The fund really wants to learn from this pilot to evolve their own approach. So you can see some of the learning questions that they are asking themselves on the slide on the left-hand side, sorry. And it's very much about shifting power to communities. So what approaches can truly shift power to communities? And what can make an effective community participation in these processes? They also want to build a movement with other funders to encourage participatory grant making and have it being more disseminated.
I think, Miriam, one of the things that I would add, just having worked a little bit with Marina and her team at WES, is this notion of building this movement with funders. And I know that they're very committed to learning alongside of Tamrac and really considering what we're going to learn with our community partner in participatory grant making, and then how to disseminate that with other funders, not only in Ontario, but funders across Canada that the WES Mariam Assefa Fund works with. And also they're looking at sharing that with their US partners as well. So it's a really great opportunity to kind of deepen our knowledge, deepen our experience, and to really learn from one another in all of this, and to really inform other practitioners and funders about participatory grant making.
Thank you, Liz, for that. So what do we talk about when we talk about participatory grant making? We're not providing here a formal definition of what that is, but the expression "nothing about us without us," we believe really captures the essence of participatory grant making. So it's all about shifting power in grant making decisions from foundation staff to the people that are most affected by the issues. So it's about giving agencies to people who benefit from funding to determine the priorities of their own lives. We see participatory grant making as ceding decision-making power about funding, and that includes also the strategy, the criteria behind those decisions to the very communities that funders aim to serve. So this is really like the spirit and the approach that we want to foster in this pilot. Now, a little bit more concretely about how we see our role at Tamrac. In this process, we really see ourselves as facilitating the process and holding the space for the communities to have meaningful conversations and authentic engagement. We want to be there to support you throughout the process, and most importantly, to build the trust among local partners, because this is essential to that kind of work. So if we go a bit more concretely into the steps that we are envisioning, the first one is to connect with potential Ontario communities and seek their input. Today is a milestone, and we thank you for showing your interest. Then we want to identify a geographic community. We're talking about one site for the pilot and key partners. Recruit key community representatives to identify the needs of immigrants and refugees in this specific community and funding priorities for this pilot. We envision this as a panel made of representatives from the community, and this is really our design team, right? That will define the needs of the communities, set the priorities, but also what is the process, like how the funds should be allocated. We're talking here about a significant investment, but I guess we want the conversation really to be based on the needs of the community first. So that could take like many different forms, like it could be, they could make the design process so that it's like several small grants, a major collective project, an innovation that could be funded, or that could also be a decision like to target a high priority vulnerable population, so, such as the Afghan refugees that will be coming, for instance. We also have set funds aside to hire a community animator with lived or living experience from that community to work closely with Tamrac and help us facilitate this whole process locally. Then we want to engage community representatives to help make funding decisions. This team could be the same team as the design team. There could be an overlap, or it could also be different if some of the members are interested themselves in participating in receiving some of the grants. Tamrac will disperse the grants to selected organizations and will also offer support to funded projects. And when I talk about support, we really want to tailor it to the needs of the community. That could be coaching, that could be connecting to experts or networks that are doing that kind of work. And also access to tools, resources, publications, anything that can help advance the work of the community. And we want to share learnings and insights on participatory grant making to help advance this form of grant making, as we've mentioned before. And we really want to stress this because for us, the community that will be selected is expected to take an active part in strategic learning activities so that we can really build on this approach more widely. Anything you'd like to add, Liz and Justin, before we take some questions and open the floor to discussion?
The only thing that I'd like to add is that while we've designed a process, we also recognize that part of this process will be with the intentionality of the community and the panel at the center. And so we have steps and we have deliverables that we've kind of put into the design, but we also recognize that these have to be iterative, they have to be a little bit adaptive, and that we're really looking forward to engaging with community and with folks from that community in a co-design process. So, you know, here's what we have in mind, but we're really looking forward to learning alongside. That's the only thing that I would add. Justin?
No, I'm good, thank you.
So perhaps just to show you what our initial and evolving timeline is. So we're here today on the left-hand side with this community engagement session. We hope by the end of September to have the community identified and to start recruiting our participatory grant-making pilot panel members. We see that in October through December, we'll identify the grant-making priorities and processes. As Liz says, we have designed this process like to facilitate those conversations to happen in the community. And from January to March 2022, invite participatory grant-making pilot proposals to this decision-making panel. And then the funding will be provided to community groups from March 2022 on. We expect this pilot to end a year later in March 2023, and will offer ongoing support and learning throughout the process. So this is the initial timeline. I'd like now to take the time for you to ask your questions about the process before we open up the floor for you to give us advice on what the selection guidelines for the community might be. So I will stop sharing my screen and I invite you to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable to do that. You can either raise your hand with the hand raising function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask your questions, or write them directly in the chat box, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
And Mariam, we already have a couple of questions in the chat box, and maybe what I'll do is I'll start with one question, and then I can see that we have some hands raised. But the first question is, can you please say a bit more about the different roles that Tamrac and WES will play in the process?
Well, I can jump on that one, and please feel free to add anything you'd like to. Marina, I see that you can also unmute yourself if you'd like to add something. So as I said, like Tamrac is an intermediary organization. We have experience with our community engagement. We are not traditionally a funder. So really our role is to help design and facilitate the whole process, and will be the intermediary organization disbursing the funds and helping with the reporting of the projects. So we'll be working very closely with the selected community. The role of WES and the Mariam Assefa Fund is well, to provide the funds to Tamrac, and also to be very close to all the learning process. So what insights, what learnings, they really want to be close to the process to be able to make, as I said, their own practice evolve and see how we can shift the power to communities and then influence the philanthropic world as well with the dissemination of those learnings. So this is how I would put it. Anything to add on this?
The only thing that I might add, Mariam, is that we also see a role for Tamrac in terms of supporting those partners that receive an investment where it's required and where it can add value. So that will evolve, I'm sure, over time, but we see that as something that Tamrac has tons of tools and resources, and there might be opportunities to share some of those, or to host a community of practice or something, you know, that might come out of that. So we see a role there for Tamrac as well.
Mm-hmm. We might take another question from the chat box and then go to the hands that are raised.
Okay, perfect. Do you want me to read the question out, Mariam? Would that be helpful? So we've got a question from Anna. Have you thought yet about whether or not you think this will be a series of newcomer collectives working in partnership to achieve common goals, or rather a series of individual projects?
I would say that it can be either or even something else. This is why we want to work locally with a panel of community representatives to design the process. So really the whole process is to be designed with by and with the community. So it could take the form at the end of like a collective project where several partners in the communities are involved. It could take the form of like enhancing what already exists in terms of generating general operating support to organizations or individual projects funded as well. So really, this is what the participatory grant making is all about. We don't know yet. The community will have to define that part. We have a hand raised from, it says my name. I think there has been a problem with the link, but it's the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. I see that you have your hand raised. Would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Sorry, it was a mistake because I was receiving a phone call and panicked.
Okay, no problem.
We also have a question from Shirley. She has her hand raised as well. So Shirley? You have to unmute yourself, Shirley, if you want to ask a question. There you go.
So the question I was asking is, are we organizing by geographic area, ethnic area? How are we organizing this project? And is it limited to only Ontario or Canada-wide? I'm not sure how we are defining community, because we can have communities in a geographic location. We can have communities Canada-wide under an ethnic or immigrant or refugee umbrella. So there's a lot of gray areas we have to define. First of all, what is community? Is it cultural? Is it geographic?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think we'll have also to come back to this question when we want to open the floor about the selection of the community. But what we can say is that we are talking here about a pilot in Ontario for 2021. So this is this is really limited to Ontario for that first pilot phase. It might evolve otherwise, but this is for the time being. And we are looking about the geographic community. Within that community, the design team could decide to focus more on one cultural community according to the needs, if this is the priority. But we're really talking here about a geographical area that, I mean, could be defined as a municipality. It could be defined as a place of belonging in a wider urban setting, for example. It really has to make sense as a unit to intervene. So I know I only partially answer your question, but I hope that in the discussion that follows this just clarifying question period, we can dive into it and really hear your thoughts and ideas on how we should select that community, what we should have in mind when we do that.
Very good, thank you.
And so I'll go back to the chat box in terms of some more communities. How will the community partners be selected, and what kinds of projects will be given priority over others? I think that's relative to a question we had earlier, but maybe Mariam, you can give some of the early thinking about that.
Yeah, in terms of the kind of project, I think we've mostly covered that, unless there's something else there you want to add, Liz. In this first a step of the process, we're really looking to reach widely into the communities, to many different partners that can be grassroots organizations, they can be immigrant and settlement serving agencies, services agencies, municipal partners, institutional partners, citizens that are volunteers or involved in the work. We really want, like when we talk about community partners, this can be really wide, right? But how they will be selected, I don't know if you mean by that question, like on the design team. I think we'll have to define that process as well, but we want a panel of around like 10 people to make it manageable, that are representative of the community. So we'll be looking for people from different sectors that I've just mentioned. Any more precision you'd like to add to this?
No, but I thought maybe what we could do is go on to the next question, because the next question actually sets us up for the next part of the conversation. And this is a question about what are the prerequisites for the pilot community? And so that's a lovely question, because one of the things that we wanted to ask all of you and to engage all of you around is for you to say to us, what do you think those prerequisites would be? So if we have done some research on a number of communities, potential communities in Ontario, but we would love to know from you as community representatives, what you would want us to consider when we're thinking about a community to partner with. Because through the first phase of the participatory grant-making pilot, we'll have to pick one community, whether it's a geographic community like the City of London, for example, or what that might look like. We want to hear from you what you think we should consider. So Shirley, you're raising your hand, so maybe you could give us some feedback on that. And Justin, you can either put your talk or put your comments in the chat box, and we will download the chat box afterwards. The third thing that you could do is you might reflect on it after this meeting and want to send us some of your feedback as well. And so we would welcome that as well. We're in the stage of trying to figure out what community is interested, but also what those criteria might be. So Shirley, over to you.
Yes, I am really interested in communities, geographic communities with a high density of refugees and immigrants. The concern I have is conflict of interest issues. So if we have participants on the panel who's rooting for the area, sorry about that. So if we have.
Go ahead, Shirley. Oh, you muted yourself again, Shirley. She might have had to take her call. Yeah, that's both of her points are, oh, go ahead, Shirley. I see that you've unmuted yourself.
I am concerned that if you have a representative from a particular community with immigrants and refugees, they may design criteria that better suits their geographic area and immigrants and communities winning those grant funding. So how are we going to deal with conflict of interest issues for the people who are sitting on the panel?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. And so we will think about, developing a conflict of interest guidelines with the panel. So have the panel do that as part of their work and be part of that conversation. That's what we envisioned in our design. And there might be a point where a panelist would also like to apply for a grant. And then we'd have to think about, okay, so, you know, how do we enact the conflict of interest guidelines? So
Yeah.
there might be people that will be part of the design process, but not necessarily part of the decision-making process around grants. There may be some
okay.
portability, or we might
Yes.
have a separate panel set up.
That's right. For the
Yes.
selection process.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. That answers my question. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Anna, what do you think are some criteria that we should be thinking
We
of?
also have Dinesh that had their hand raised for some time now. So
Okay, I didn't see Dinesh's hand. So let's go to Dinesh first, and then we'll come to Anna.
And we invite you to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable to do so that we can have a more open conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dinesh, we can hear you.
Perfect. So one of the criteria that I think we should be looking at it is and I think it was already mentioned there in the proposal also, what communities are helping the immigrants and refugees in building the economic mobility. Okay, so economic mobility should be the key. The second part of the economic mobility is the community safety part of it. So those organizations that are helping build the economic mobility of the immigrants and refugees, irrespective of the fact whether they are new age organizations or whether they have been in the doing this for the last little while or so. Because what I have seen, there are many new organizations that have been coming up in the community with the passion and commitment to the community, but the one criteria they are not being able to meet is they are being told, hey, you're a newbie. Okay, you've been only doing this work for last 1 year or 2 years or so. Okay, we are looking at funding those organizations which have been in existence for a little while. I understand the experience matters the most, but one of the things that you have to, if you don't encourage, if you don't recognize the work of these emerging organizations, how will they sustain? And two is how will other people get an inspiration to start doing this work to support immigrants and refugees if the newbies starts winding up their operations because they don't have enough financial to run the programs and services that are actually needed to support the community. Am I making sense? Were you able to hear me, or do you want me to log
so Dinesh, you have been breaking up, but we did
you
hear.
Want to write it in the chat?
Yeah.
So
Thank you for writing in the chat box.
Yeah.
I see that your recommendation is that we should encourage those who are coming off the ground now, but are focusing on building economic mobility and community safety. So we thank you for that suggestion, and that these new organizations, irrespective of ethnicity and geographic, should be encouraged because they are innovating some of the projects that are the need of the hour.
Thank you for that, Dinesh. We really appreciate hearing from you. Anna, what do you think about some criteria?
My thought is that when the border opens, that new communities in need may emerge, and that it will be really important in terms of the timeline to kind of think about how the opening of the border introduces new communities who haven't been able to arrive in Canada to, now come, and what their needs might be, and that, people are, I guess, the group that's kind of figuring out who the community is that should be focused on, we'll just kind of have to decide if we want to focus on newcomer, refugee, immigrant communities that have been marginalized and especially disadvantaged because of the pandemic, but are already here, or if we really want to sort of, see what's happening as the border opens and who is most in need.
Thank you for that. That's a very interesting point that you raise, and one I don't think that we've thought about. So really appreciate that perspective. Any other folks want to weigh in here in terms of criteria that we should be thinking about from when we're considering communities?
Well, people think of what they'd like to add. I just realized that there's a question that we've missed here from Sarah about the time commitment and if there will be any compensation for that work, realizing that this is still early in the work. This is definitely something that we are concerned about. And yes, we'd like to compensate the time commitment of anyone who would be involved in both the design team and the decision-making team. That has been part of the key learning that we've had, also engaging with people with lived or living experience. And so this is a strong principle for Tamrac in this work.
Thanks for that, Miriam. And thanks for the question, Sarah. Other criteria that we should be thinking about from a community selection perspective. Well, I don't see any others. You may, go ahead. Oh yes, Jessica, I missed your hand up there, Jessica. So over to you.
No problem. I just thought of adding, thinking about equitable economies, given that's the focus, it might be helpful to define that a little bit and think about how the geographies and the economies in those contexts relate to newcomers, immigrants, and refugees. And if your interest is around impact, then that might influence the criteria as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very helpful thing to consider as well. And I see Sarah putting in the chat box, is there any evidence-based data that we can use to make this decision? And so we have been collecting data on communities. And so some of the data that we've looked at is the population size of the communities that in Ontario, and then we also looked at the size of the immigrant community. We're also, looking to you to say, are there other evidence-based criteria that you think we should consider? So we've used that as a demographic. Justin is the person who's been collecting data. So Justin, any other data that we have just in our scan of communities pulled together?
Yeah, just really quickly, two of the other pieces have been looking at what are the organizations that are immigrant serving or immigrant led within the communities that we've been looking at, as well as what their community plans, what community plans exist within the different communities from that base start that we've been looking at. So if there's one that's already been created, and what does it look like, and how was it developed? Who were the partners involved, and things like that.
Yeah, we really recognize in this process that there's a lot of really great things happening in a lot of communities across Ontario. And so we're pretty excited about that and have learned a lot just even in our cursory bit of research. Mariam, I think we're coming to a little bit to the end of our time. If any of you think of any other criteria, you know, in the next couple of days or so, please reach out to us, and we'll do our best to, you know, scan what's out there and see what that how that might help inform this decision process. So Mariam, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, so I will share my screen again about next steps. So as both Justin and Liz just mentioned, we are researching community data right now, and very open to any more contribution on your part to help us define this. Tamrac is now inviting letters of interest from community partners or organizations about why your community should be selected for the participatory grant-making pilot. We're having a relatively tight deadline for this, which is September 15. And really what we want to hear through that letter of interest is why this is important to your community, why building equitable economies. And I understand that we could define that further, but from your community's perspective, how you understand it and why it is important to you. What are some of the assets that your community already has? A lot is going on, as Liz said, and we really want to reinforce what is already existing and help develop it further. So what are some of the assets, the partnership, history of collaboration, whatever you feel is relevant as an asset, and also the readiness of your community, how you would describe the readiness to take part in a participatory grant-making pilot. We want to know what outcomes you expect from this process and how you'd like to contribute to the learning, and also take from this learning to reinvest it to improve your practices. So this is really about your why, your assets, the outcome you expect, something very simple, can be short, and we don't expect everyone to agree on the community on one partnership letter. It could be different organizations sending in a letter of interest saying, like, just waving, our community is interested and this is why. And then we would convene all the partners in that community to have a further conversation. If your community is ready, you can also have one letter with all the partners signing in, and a consultation or a roundtable, like taking the lead on the project. I see that there are some hands that are raised, so we might take a few minutes to answer questions about next steps.
Go ahead, Mariam.
I see people with hands raised. Shirley, is it your hand from before, or did you have a question? No, I think it was a hand from before then. Are there any clarifying question on the next steps, or how you can express interest?
No, I think your slide did a great job. I wanted your contact information, but you provided it on the PowerPoint slide. So I'm all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shirley. And we'll also send a follow-up email with the presentation. Feel free to share it to anyone who couldn't attend today as well. So yes, we'll share the slide, the presentation, and then a reminder of what a letter of interest might be. We see a question here from Anna. If we wanted to submit a letter in partnership with an organization that is not already on your list, is that allowed? So the answer to that is yes, definitely. We don't pretend we have reached out to everyone in the community. So yes, please feel free to share this call with anyone that you feel is doing relevant work with immigrants and refugees.
Yeah, and I just want to add, Mariam, that in a couple of days, we're going to send all of the people on the call a follow-up email. And in the email will be a link to this recording and also the PowerPoint slides. And so feel free to share them with other partners in your community. And with other partners that you might have in the broader networks that you work with in Ontario, because there might be some folks that we don't know about in other communities. We started, with a smaller list of folks to be invited to this this call, but we're happy to have you share it as widely as you would like to share it. So feel free to do that. And you can do that by just pointing people to the webpage. So in the invitation, you got a link to a webpage, and all of the resources will be on that webpage.
Wonderful. I see we still have a couple minutes. Are there any further questions, comments, anything you have on your mind at this point?
I might just say, as a bit of a wrap up, I'm really excited that we have so many folks on the call with us, and that you had such great ideas and great criteria that you added to what we need to consider in terms of the community engagement process. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today. Over to you, Mariam.
Oh, I echo you, Liz, to thank everyone. Thank you for your time and your valuable contribution to this process. And I'm just really excited to hear from your community.
Thanks so much, everybody.
People are leaving. And just put back the thank you. Thank you.